Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday Apocryphal Podcast, your one-stop shop for everything Friday Apocryphal and podcast. And boy, do we have a show for you today. Today we are covering 2 Maccabees chapters 7 through 8.
Yeah, we did it.
We're doing this.
Killing it.
We got this.
Woo!
Yeah, so today we're covering some more stuff from 2 Maccabees.
Isn't that incredible?
I think there's some interesting stuff that we'll be covering today.
I have the Anchor Bible version of 2 Maccabees, a new translation with introduction and commentary by Jonathan A. Goldstein.
You know, that's so weird. I was just about to ask you what translation you were using.
Yeah, I used my psychic powers and foresight to predict your action.
That's incredible. It's almost as if I say it all the time.
Almost.
Yeah.
Let's get James Randi on here.
We also have Erdmann's commentary on the Bible, and we have the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary, Volume 6.
Which has a whole bunch of apocryphal stuff in it.
It does. It has, it has Esther and also the additions to Esther, Tobit, Judith, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, the Book of Wisdom, Sirach. It also has Daniel and some additions to Daniel.
And an introduction to apocalyptic literature.
Yeah, but I read a whole book on that already. So
yeah, we also have the Hermenia commentary.
Yes, on 2 Maccabees by Robert Dorn, who also wrote the 1st and 2nd Maccabees sections in the New Interpreter's Bible commentary.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's a thing. So we have a lot of sources.
Yeah, we do.
We hope everyone is having a happy quarantine.
Yep. Happy quarantine, miss.
That is what it is, yeah.
But
one day,
we
will look back on this time.
Next week, or not next week, but on Sunday, we're finishing Psalms.
We are finishing Psalms, and
we have a poll result.
Yes, we do. So on Sunday, we are going to be finishing the canonical Psalms, and we are going over the 5 apocryphal Psalms.
Yes, we are.
They're pretty short. We don't really have too much commentary on them.
Psalms of David.
Yeah.
Of David,
Yeah, we don't have too much commentary on them, so they should just be pretty quick.
Yep.
Breeze right through them.
We'll call out anything that seems important and whatever.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, well, why don't I get started in this, unless there's a note that you want to get into right off the bat.
There is not, although this is another martyrdom story. Because we
right.
ended off with the martyrdom of Eliezer. So now we have another martyrdom story.
Okay, so there's a long introductory note on in this version. He talks about the history and idea of the ideas and patterns underlying our chapter is highly complicated. Jason of Cyrene wrote the events as part of Antiochus's persecution of the Jews, but he wrote scores of years after they occurred. Thus, his narrative could reflect not only the events, ideas, and literary patterns of the 160s BCE, but those both of earlier and later times. On the evolution of the patterns and theological concepts here, see Nicholsburg's Resurrection, pages 11 through 111.
We do not have that.
We don't have that, but for those of you at home who are into this stuff, you might be interested in that for this chapter. So if you have it, check it out.
So I think I actually should kind of start a little bit with something here from Erdmann's.
Okay.
So for the section on the martyrdom of 7 brothers. So it's going to be 7 brothers and their mother. And they get martyred pretty much. So this episode has all the marks of the storyteller's art. Goldstein, actually in that book that we have right there, pages 296 through 98. Are you currently on those?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
I was on them.
Okay.
I was just before them, actually, because it's a very long introductory note.
Sure. Goldstein suggests that the story has a literary rather than a historical origin, being developed from the description of a mother bereaved on her 7 children, coupled with the story, and that's from Jeremiah 15:5-9, coupled with the story of Zedekiah's children executed in front of their parent in 2 Kings, and also in Jeremiah. Goldstein, on page 299, further suggests that the 7 martyred sons are to be understood as a counter to the 7 sons of Mattathias, the 5 of 2 Maccabees 2:1-5, together with Joseph and Azariah of 1 Maccabees 5:56, seen as half-brothers. Mm-hmm. The story is more clearly related to that of Taxo and his 7 sons in the Assumption of Moses, and there's also a reference there to Nikolsburg. So... yeah, very...
let me reference some of the things that Goldstein brings up then. He says, Dan 7:27 and Enoch 90:38 show how the victims of persecution looked forward to God's raising of a Jewish
Dan is
king.
Daniel, by the way.
Yeah.
Just so everyone...
Well, it's short for Daniel. Yeah, but it's Dan.
Yeah.
Come on. God's mercy.
Lawrence, Dan is Daniel? Oh.
Through,
I mean, maybe future historians will thank you, but
yeah, I think they would.
I'm upset right now.
I don't think they would.
I'm giving useful facts here.
Through fulfilling Deuteronomy 32:36 and gave victory to the Jewish forces led by Judas Maccabeus. As presented in the narrative, the martyrs fulfill the prophecies and avoid the pitfalls which could have caused the failure of Taxo. They are a mother and 7 sons. Nothing indicates they put God to the test by openly seeking martyrdom. Somehow they came to be arrested. Strangely, our chapter contains no allusion to the blood mentioned in Deuteronomy 32:43. Has one been lost through abridgment? Already in ancient times, readers were perplexed by the vagueness of this chapter. What was the home of the mother and her sons, and where did they meet their deaths? The writer reports no change of scene between 610 and 742. Judea and Jerusalem seem clearly to be the same scene for the deaths of the circumcising woman, the Sabbath observers in the caves, and Eleazar. Jeremiah 15:5-9 is addressed to Jerusalem, and only by contorted interpretation can events listed there be removed from Judea. See especially Jeremiah 15:7. The author of 4:18-5-6 unhesitantly places the events of our chapter at Jerusalem, and some Christian writers follow him. So that's 4th Maccabees. Also,
although to quickly note on that, yeah, because there's no indication of a change of scene from the previous story. But later tradition, both Christian and Jewish, located them at Antioch, where Antiochus would have held court, since there is no indication that Antiochus ever visited Jerusalem again.
Mm-hmm. All right. Also, this bit on page 299 that you referenced, he says here, the facts of the persecution so far as they are known to us would allow any of the 3 stories to have truly taken place. The Jewish resistors ultimately prevailed, and many of the pious were unwilling to give credit to the Hasmoneans. Pious anti-Hasmoneans must have searched both the scriptures and the facts of the persecution for the cause of God's sudden change from wrath to mercy upon Israel. If so, they could have reasoned that Jeremiah 14:19-15:9 and 1 Samuel 2:2-11 had somehow been fulfilled. Certainly, whole families had been tortured to death during the persecution. Pious anti-Hasmoneans could have had strong motives to produce story 2 or story 3, even if the particular event described here never happened. Indeed, there are fairly strong clues suggesting that the story of the mother and her 7 sons became an important element in anti-Hasmonean propaganda. For a time, partisans of the Hasmonean brothers appear to have tried to present them and their mother as the true martyr family. All 5 of Mattathias' sons died by violence. We know nothing of the fate of Mattathias' wife or wives, though Mattathias is reportedly to have had only 5 sons, John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. Jason of Cyrene takes pains to name 2 other brothers of Judas.
Yeah, the half brothers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Joseph and Esdras or Esdras or Esdras. The reading of the latter name, which varies in the witnesses to the text, makes no difference. All represent Azariah or short nicknames for it. We have no information on the deaths of Joseph and Azariah, but if they too were killed by enemies of the Jews, we would have another group of 7 brothers who gave their lives, but in active combat. By the time of writing of First Maccabees, the Hasmoneans wished to dissociate themselves from Joseph and Azariah, who disobeyed Judas's orders and suffered a disastrous defeat at the height of God's favor for Israel. The Hasmonean propagandist explained that Joseph and Azariah did not belong to that family of men to whom it had been granted to be agents of Israel's deliverance. The mere fact that they dared to disobey Judas's orders might suggest that Joseph and Azariah, too, had claims to be God's chosen agents. According to 1:5-18, Joseph's father's name was Zechariah. Azariah's father's name is not given, but he too could have been the son of Zechariah. The accounts in 1st and 2nd Maccabees can both be true if the 5 Hasmonean brothers were half-brothers to Joseph and Azariah through their mother. We would then have an activist group of 7 brothers united not through their father, but through their mother. Perhaps the mother, too, met a violent death.
Sure, but it's probably not the same guys, since the same guys are doing other things in the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, apparently 4th Maccabees gives the same account in much grislier detail.
Well, unfortunately, we're not going over 4th Maccabees anytime soon. Why don't I get into chapter 7 proper?
Sounds good.
All right. Chapter 7. At that time, 7 brothers, too, with their mother, were arrested, and the king tortured them with whips and thongs in an effort to force them to partake of pork, contrary to the prohibitions of the Torah. Obviously, pork's not kosher.
Right, and actually this is the same kind of reasoning from before in Eleazar's martyrdom story, because trying to get him to eat something he didn't want to eat, and once again they stay true to the law, I guess, and
when was this written? Is there anything on the dating of this section?
The section in particular, I don't know, but
At least it follows directly after that story.
Yeah, we definitely talked about the dating of 2nd Maccabees as a whole. Although I would assume this would also be from Jason's work as well.
Right. The reason I ask is because, I mean, at least as far as the story goes, we're getting pretty close to the Common Era.
Yeah.
And there is a significant theological difference between the Christian sects and the Jewish sects, because Jesus says it doesn't matter what goes into your mouth, but what comes out of it, right? In the New Testament. And they're really, like, we've been reading the Bible for a while.
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
That is.
There really haven't been that many mentions of how terrible it is to eat pork.
Yeah, not too many.
Until we get to 2nd Maccabees,
yeah.
And then there's like this anti-pork thing. So I wonder if one is the result of the other, like you know, not necessarily that this is a response to the change in Christian theology, but maybe that the change in Christian theology was due to a greater conversation about the dietary habits of the people following the Greek occupation.
I mean, maybe. I don't know how big of a role dietary habits would have played in it.
Well,
it's everything.
I mean,
I know it's a big deal now.
It is a big deal now, and
I know it was also a big deal back then, but I don't know if that would have been like the crux of it.
Well, why don't I continue? One of them, as spokesman for all, said, "What do you expect to learn from questioning us? We are ready to die rather than violate the laws of our forefathers." The king, enraged, ordered griddles and cauldrons to be heated red hot. As soon as they were red hot, the king gave the order to cut out the tongue of the one who had acted as spokesman, and scalp him and cut off his hands and feet, while his brothers and his mother look on. The body was now completely helpless, but the king ordered that he be brought, still breathing, to the fire and fried. As the odor of frying began to spread widely, the brothers and their mother exhorted one another to die nobly.
So here's actually kind of something cool about the word scalping. Scalping is literally to scalp in Scythian fashion, as described in Herodotus 464. In Pliny, the Scythians are classed as barbarians who eat human flesh. In the aftermath of Milan's, unsuccessful revolt against Antiochus III, Hermias, the harsh commander of Antiochus, destroyed many of the people of Seleucia by such mutilation as described here.
As the odor of frying began to spread widely, the brothers and their mother exhorted one another to die nobly, saying, "The Lord God looks on and truly is relenting concerning us, as Moses declared in the song which confronts as a witness, quote, and he will relent concerning his servants."
Yeah, so that's a quotation from Deuteronomy 32:36. That's the Song of Moses.
Right. I figured the Song of Moses because it's the song which confronts as a witness. Oh, was that like a Greek term for it or something?
What verse is that specifically?
That was verse 6, the very end.
No, I don't see anything specifically on that.
Let me see if Goldstein...
Oh, it's also found in Psalms 135:14. Yeah.
6, the song which confronts as witness. The title for Deuteronomy 32 is derived from Deuteronomy 31:21. Interesting.
That's a thing we know now.
Yep. When the first of the brothers had passed away in this manner, they brought the second to be wantonly tortured, and after ripping off his scalp by the hair, they asked him, "Will you eat before your body is torn limb from limb?" He answered in the language of his forefathers, "No." And so he too, in turn, was tortured. With his last...
So it's in Hebrew instead of Greek. Yeah.
Which is low.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What's Greek?
I don't know.
You don't know Greek? No.
No.
Oh man.
I don't speak Greek. With his last breath, he said, You fiend, are making us depart from our present life. But the King of the universe will resurrect us, who die for the sake of his laws, to a new eternal life. After him, the third was subjected to wanton torture. On demand, he promptly broke forth his tongue and cheerfully held out his hand. His words were noble. I received these from heaven, and for the sake of his laws I hold them cheap. From him I hope to receive them back.
So notice how there's this theme of resurrection here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you remember, let me pull this up. The story of Eliezer reflected the traditional belief in a shade-like existence in Sheol or Hades. In that story, the author had been concerned to emphasize the nobility and dignity of Eliezer as he underwent torture, so there is no discussion of afterlife. In the story of the mother and her 7 sons, however, the author concentrates on contrasting the fate of the martyrs with the eventual fate of the king, drawing on the notion of a life for the righteous after this life. the author highlights the paradox that the dying martyrs are in fact happier than the supposedly successful king.
You know,
I don't. Why don't you tell me?
It's not intelligent by any means. They're like, eat pork or you're going to die. And they're like, oh no, torture us brutally instead.
Well, I mean, the whole thing is if they break one of God's laws, the punishment would be far worse.
You know, I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure that when I was young, they said that there was something in the Talmud which allowed people to break the laws.
I mean, considering it was a bunch of philosophical discourse, yeah, I'm sure.
If only these people had been privy to that. The king himself and his men were astonished at the spirit of the young man who set torments at naught. When he too had passed away, they tormented the fourth with similar tortures. At the point of death, he said, "Better it is to pass away from among men while looking forward in hope to the fulfillment of God's promises that we will be resurrected by him, for you will have no resurrection unto life." Forthwith, they brought the fifth and began to torture him. Gazing at the king, he said, "You wield power among men and work your will, but you are mortal. Think not that God has abandoned our people. You wait and see his great might when he puts you and your seed to the torture."
Yeah, see, that's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, like, oh, you atheists, you wait and see.
Yeah, exactly. You wait and see.
Yeah. Ridiculous. Thereafter, they brought the sixth. And as he was about to die, he said, "Do not indulge in vain delusions. Through our own fault, we are subjected to these sufferings because we have sinned against our God."
Yeah, so the thing is, they obviously don't want to sin more.
Right.
Because that would be even worse.
Right.
But this theme of, the Jews blaming themselves for their own tribulations, that has been around for centuries at this point, at the time of the writing.
Oof. Yeah, I bet it's just like Moses had a pet pig. He was like,
maybe.
Nobody killed his pig, man. They pass belief. You, however, think not to escape unpunished after having dared to contend with God. Most remarkable was the mother. She deserves to be held in glorious memory, for she looked on as her 7 sons perished in the course of a single day and bore it bravely because of her hopes in the Lord. Each one of them in turn she exhorted in the language of their forefathers. Filled with noble resolution, she took her womanly thoughts and fired them with a manly spirit.
Yeah, so the whole thing about the manly spirit, in a patriarchal culture, her nobility is shown through her possessing a man's courage. That's the translation that's used here. Keep reading actually.
Okay.
Tell me when you get to the end of 23.
As she told them, "I do not know how you came to be in my womb. It was not I who gave you spirit and life, nor did I determine the order of the composition of the elements of each of you. Surely, then, the creator of the universe who shaped man's coming into being and fathomed the fashioning of everything with mercy will restore spirit and life to you, inasmuch as you now hold your very selves cheap for the sake of his laws." That's the end of the verse. Very strange. I do not know how you came to be in my womb.
That was, what verse was that specifically? 23?
That was 22.
Oh, that was 22. Okay.
I just finished 23, but that specific part was 22.
Okay. The stress on the first person pronoun, my womb, or I is used twice apparently, together with the emphatic particle, and here's some Greek, so I'm going to have to read this. Toi garon prepares for the contrast with the one who does know, God. God is called the master of the world. He is the creator of all, and creator in, and he's creator in the second kingdoms. Molding human production. And that, molding human production refers back to Genesis 7. In Genesis 5, when the biblical narrative lists the progeny of Adam and Eve, the Septuagint reads, "This is the book of the generation of humans." Yeah, we remember that.
Yeah.
And this harks back to the Septuagint reading of Genesis 2:4. So I guess it was just a polemical device. Not even a polemical device, just a rhetorical device.
Well, it says here, believers argued for resurrection by pointing to the mystery of the growth of the embryo in the womb. See TB Sanhedrin 92a.
So, yeah, big mystery.
Big mystery. Well, I don't know how they got there either.
This is a kind of Cotton Eye Joe mystery.
Well,
where did he come from?
Where did he go?
Where'd he go?
I wish he'd tell us.
He never writes, he never calls.
It's really sad. We're just waiting for Cotton Eye Joe.
Well, I'm not. If it hadn't been for him, I would have been married a long time ago. Antiochus sensed he was being treated with contempt. The reproachful voice roused his hostility. Nevertheless, there was still the youngest. And Antiochus not only addressed appeals to him again and again, he even made repeated promises on oath to make him rich and prosperous and admit him to the order of the king's friends and entrust important functions to him, provided he would depart from the ways of his forefathers. That's a big promise.
Yeah, in traditional literature, the youngest son is always the most important.
Well, I mean, unless you're a Levite, in which case it's your oldest son.
Yeah.
When also seventh son is traditionally, it's a thing that pops up. Someone's a seventh son, or the seventh son of a seventh son.
Yeah, and actually there was a note here earlier about how the particular motif of a mother's dying and her seven sons was a favorite one in later Jewish literature, where the event takes place either before a Roman emperor or in the days of persecution. So yeah, apparently I would assume those two motifs were used together quite often. Yeah.
Okay. When the youth paid him no heed, the king called upon the mother and urged her to give the lad the advice that would save his life. In response to his insistent urgings, she consented to convince her son. She bent over him, and with scorn for the cruel tyrant, she said in the language of her forefathers, "My son, have pity on me, who carried you in my womb for 9 months and nursed you for 3 years and reared you and brought you to your present age. I ask you, my child, to look upon the heaven and the earth and to contemplate all therein. I ask you to understand that it was not after they existed that God fashioned them, and in the same manner the human race comes to be. Do not fear this executioner, but be worthy of your brothers and accept death, so that in his mercy I may recover you along with your brothers."
So what you said before about... Okay, so the mother again emphasizes that God is the creator of the cosmos, as can be seen by viewing heaven and earth. The mother states that God fashioned the individual things from previously unformed matter. Note that in the Septuagint, Jeremiah 4:23, the Hebrew term, the Hebrew terms, whatever and whatever, I don't know them, I can't read this, but apparently they're the same as in Genesis 1:2, and they're translated as uden, nothing. That's what that means. The Lucianic manuscripts have not ok es onton, but es ok onton. which could be translated as from things which do not exist. A parallel to this phrase is found in Xenophon. Parents made their children to be from what did not exist. And he has the Greek there as well. But the whole thing is that Christian writers and the Latin translator of 2nd Maccabees took this to mean that God had created everything out of nothing, ex nihilo. So that was the interpretation of this.
Well, at least in this, where exactly does he say it was
in the stars thing?
He says, carried you in my womb.
I think it was...
Look to the heaven and earth to contemplate all therein.
I think it was verse 28.
It was not after they existed that God fashioned them, and in the same manner, the human race comes to be.
Yeah.
So, but at least in this translation, it really...
Congratulations.
Yep. It really just seems to be an order of operations thing, right? Like it's a temporal argument. It's not like a material argument.
Yeah, I would say so.
But if you wanted to take the ex nihilo path, then I mean, there's arguments for and against, right? I mean, you can also use the infinite regression for an ex nihilo argument. But I mean, it's one of those metaphysical questions that has no possible clear answer.
Yeah, at least as of yet.
Yeah, which is unfortunate.
Yeah,
definitely unfortunate. But even if it were from nothing, it would be interesting to see what specifically this kind of Maccabean Judaism, that Hasmonean flavor, takes that to mean. Because like there's a distinction that some Jews and Christians make between like he made and he created.
Right, yeah.
Right. So in say like created from nothing, well, that could mean created from something which does not have the quality of life in terms of humans. Because with humans specifically, they were not created from nothing. They were created by dirt and spit.
That's true.
Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what the Hasmonean idea of nothing would be in that instance.
That's a good point, actually.
Anyways, when I keep going here, she was still speaking to the last of these words when the youth said, "What are you waiting for? I refuse to obey the king's command. I heed the command of the Torah given through Moses to our forefathers. You who have devised all evil against the Hebrews shall surely not escape the hands of God. As for us, we are suffering for our own sins. If our living Lord has for a short time become angry with us in order to chastise and teach us, he will again become reconciled with his servants. You, however, you impious wretch, most blood-stained of all men, do not soar with vain delusions as false hopes give you the insolence to lift your hand against the children of heaven. You have not yet escaped the judgment of Almighty God who watches over us. My brothers, having borne pain for over a short while, now have inherited eternal life under the terms of God's covenant, whereas you shall suffer through the judgment of God, the just punishment for your arrogance. I, following my brother's example, give up my body and soul for the sake of the laws of our forefathers, praying to God that he speedily have mercy upon our nations." You know, that's an interesting bit right there. I give up my body and soul. Right. So what does that mean?
Which verse specifically?
That verse was verse 37.
Yeah, body and soul. So Razis had risked body and soul in the defense of Judaism, and Judas is the foremost champion of the citizens with both body and soul in 1530. The author has noted a difference between body and soul in 630. So if you want to go to chapter 6, verse 30. But the two are intertwined, and you can cross-reference 3:16. He does not have the same viewpoint as the author of the Wisdom of Solomon, for whom, quote, the mortal body weighs down the soul. Here, the brothers surrender both for the ancestral laws.
6 verse 30 includes, not the whole verse, but it includes, though able to escape death in my body, I submit to cruel torment under the lash, and that yet in my soul I am glad to suffer it out of reverence for him. So, yeah, there is a distinction between body and soul, but I think that's consistent with the Bible in general, too.
Well, yeah, definitely.
What I find interesting about it is that he says that he's giving up his body and his soul, because that would imply that the soul is something which can be given up.
Well, or maybe he's meaning in a different way. Like maybe, sorry, you said that was verse 37? Okay, I'm going to check the translation in here because maybe it's different.
The only thing that Goldstein says is, have mercy upon in the boy's prayer is probably a paraphrase of relent at Deuteronomy 32:36, the text on which the martyrs in verse 6 place their faith. The hope for the end of God's rage and the beginning of God's mercy foreshadows chapter 8, especially 8:27. The prayer that Antiochus...
Well, it says in here, I, like my brothers, surrender both body and soul.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is a little different.
Right. Here it says, give up my body and soul. But it's a little different, but essentially the same. So, yeah, he doesn't have a note on this part. But, I mean, that raises significant theological problems, doesn't it?
Well, because, if you're talking about surrendering your soul, and then in Eliezer's story, it was his soul still, he didn't surrender his soul. His soul was still strong, and he was fine with, taking that punishment. So in the context of surrendering your soul, then...
Maybe it's like give up the ghost.
I've never even heard that.
It happened all the time in the Bible.
We read it a bit, yeah.
In the King James Version of the
Was
Bible.
Definitely.
Yeah. And throughout the Torah, don't you remember? The King James Version continually said, and he gave up the ghost.
And the spirit left him.
Oh, okay, like I mean, spirit's leaving. Yeah, sure, I remember that.
Yeah, but I found it interesting. Well, if they mean it as give up the ghost, which just means die, then it makes sense. You know,
sure.
Perfectly fine.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. Anyways, when I think I'm at near the end here.
That'd be weird because they're still talking about, like, this is still in the context of resurrection.
I hear ya.
Right. And so you would think, because they've been continually talking about resurrection, you would think that he wouldn't give up his soul unless the soul is now distinct from the spirit, which... I mean, I know later Christian theologies, Trinitarian theologies definitely had that kind of distinction. There was like a lower mind and an upper mind. But that's a really weird distinction to make because one of the first philosophy classes I took, the guy said, oh, no, it wasn't actually in college. It was one of the lecture series I watched on YouTube. John Searle, Philosophy of Mind, He goes on, he's like, some people say that there's just a body. Some say that there's a body and this thing called a mind, which not everybody agrees with. And then some people add the soul into that too, which is already throwing something into something that's overcomplicated. But I imagine that if John Searle had to listen to... ideas about there being a difference between the spirit and the soul.
Sure, yeah.
That would be a much longer spiel that he gave. Anyways, I'm going to go on here. May you, through being afflicted and scourged, come to acknowledge that he alone is God. With me and my brothers, may the Almighty put an end to the rightful anger inflicted upon our entire people. Enraged, the king, in his resentment over being mocked, treated him still worse than the others. So he perished undefiled, having put trust entirely in the Lord. And last, after her sons, died the mother. Let us end here the stories of compulsion by extreme torture to partake of the meat of the pagan sacrifices. That's a really weird way to end the chapter. I don't think I've seen before in any of these books.
He's right.
Now let us end here the story that we were just telling.
The thing is, he has those weird introductions, right? The epitomist.
Yeah.
So he, maybe he wants a weird ending. But the last verse here, it sums up the martyrdoms of both Eliezer and the 7 sons by the use of the phrase eating of sacrifices, a term found only in the account of Eliezer's martyrdom, and and then he also uses the word tortures, a word whose root is found in the account of the mother and her 7 sons.
All right. Well, that's the end of chapter 7.
There is one thing I actually wanted to note.
All right.
Yeah.
Erdmans.
Yes, from Erdmans. And it's actually about the ex nihilo thing. The words of verse 28 appear to raise an issue discussed by ancient philosophers. Epicureans, such as Lucretius, argued that nothing could be made from what did not exist. It was not possible to make something out of non-existent matter, and one did not need to postulate a creator deity to explain the existence of the universe, which is everlasting. The mother, with a different purpose in mind, argues that God did not create the heavens and the earth or the human race out of pre-existent matter.
Right. But the problem with that first argument is that it presupposes that the universe is everlasting.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Or that it's made of matter.
A God who can thus create the human race where nothing previously existed can a priori recreate the mother's son. Yeah, the mother's concern is for the possibility of resurrection, not for the doctrine of creation out of nothing, ex nihilo.
All right.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah, because it seems really strange to just throw that in there.
Yeah, right.
Right. The entire narrative was about like God resurrects righteous people, right? Which, if you paid attention in our Enoch episodes, we had a very thorough discussion about righteous ones.
Yes, we did. And actually, he actually lists First Enoch here. Doran does in the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary. The first Jewish discussion of an after-death judgment is found in the earliest parts of First Enoch. Yeah, it was the first kind of discussion on it.
All right.
Which, we read. It's all there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see that whenever you want, really.
After this.
After this, obviously. You don't want to watch it during this. That'd be a problem.
In fact,
watch them all at once.
If you're enjoying the stream so far,
drop a like.
Give us a like. Yeah.
Subscribe if you haven't.
We aren't having a really active comment field today.
Not at all, actually.
Not at all.
Hear from you. Come
on,
guys.
We'd love to see chatting it up in there. I mean,
we want to hear your thoughts on this.
Unless you're like taking a bath or something, right?
Then we especially want to hear your thoughts.
Right. Though it is May Day, maybe they're protesting the YouTube chat function.
Okay. Fair enough.
I work today at all.
Can't really argue with that.
Yeah. Okay, so chapter 8.
Yes, chapter 8.
God's defense of the people. Actually, 8:1 through 10:8 is God's defense of the people.
And this section here is Judas's first victories.
Yes, it says here, to present dramatically how God's anger has changed to mercy, the author singles out one battle and one opponent. The dramatization can easily be seen by comparing this account with that in 1 Maccabees. After describing the onset of Judas's guerrilla tactics, 1 Maccabees describes 2 battles, one against Apollonius and one against Saron. This is 1 Maccabees 3:10 through 12 and 1 Maccabees 3:13 through 28.
Yeah, we're going to be discussing
26.
quite a bit of differences between the accounts.
Before the account most like that of 2 Maccabees 8 in 1 Maccabees 3:38 through 4:25. In particular, 1 Maccabees emphasizes the tactical maneuvers, a surprise attack by Gorgias, Judas's escape and his surprise attack on Gorgias's camp, and the subsequent flight of Gorgias, 1 Maccabees 4:1 through 25. In 2 Maccabees, there are no such maneuvers, but one pitched battle decides all. The battles with Apollonius and Saron receive only the vaguest mention. Judas captured the strategic positions and put to flight not a few of the enemy, 8:6. In addition, although 1 Maccabees reports that Lysias sent out Ptolemy, Nicanor, and Gorgias, 1 Maccabees 3:38, with Nicanor and Gorgias, with the main villain being Gorgias. In 2 Maccabees, Ptolemy sends Nicanor and Gorgias, and Nicanor is the main villain. And there was also some discussion that we had in 1 Maccabees about Nicanor and Gorgias and how they may not be the same Nicanor and Gorgias
Right.
at different points in different texts.
Yeah. Also, you might want to remember this, but page 10 of the Hermenia commentary has a good discussion on how many different like how many Timothys are there? How many Philips are there? So that's something we will be hitting on a little bit today. So we can definitely cover that.
I'll remember that for future reference.
Yeah.
Also,
I mean, I like to think Timothy pops up in here.
All right. There's a little bit about this in Eerdmans that I want to go over. It says, well, 1 Maccabees recounts 4 campaigns of Judas west of the Jordan, the cleansing of the temple, and a series of wars with neighboring peoples before recounting the death of Antiochus. 2 Maccabees gives an account of 1 campaign only before that event, preceded by a few verses on the start of Judas's rebellion. 8:1 through 7 provide an alternative to 1 Maccabees 2 as an introduction to the story of the rebellion. The account of Judas enlisting supporters through the villages and attacking towns and villages by night to frighten people already threatened by Antiochus' persecution is entirely credible, though it has received rhetorical enhancement in verses 2 through 5. In verse 5, the author introduces the theme of chapter 7, 37 through 38, which, if you recall, verses 37 through 38, I'm trying to pull them up in the Hermenia version here just because it's...
In the very last chapter that we did?
Yeah, in the last chapter that we did.
That was the one that ended with the ex nihilo thing, I think.
Yeah,
not really ex nihilo thing, but
it didn't,
you know.
It didn't end with that. 37 says,
Okay.
I, like my brothers, surrender both body and soul for the sake of the ancestral laws. This is the last bit of the speech that the last son gave.
Sure.
So apparently that has a lot of parallels in verse 5.
Well, I guess we'll see.
Yes.
So, chapter 8. Judas, also known as Maccabeus, and his men stealthily slipped into the villages and enlisted the aid of their kinsmen, and gained also the adherence of those who had remained faithful to Judaism. Thus they raised a force of about 6,000, and I think that's the first thing, because it has a different number. I think another account had 3,000, right, in 1 Maccabees?
Certainly not that big.
I'm not
But,
sure
yeah.
exactly. There weren't that many people fighting alongside Judas.
Well, I remember in the first one.
It says in 1 Maccabees 4:6, Judas has 3,000 fighters beside him in the first battle.
Yep. They called upon the Lord to look upon his people, oppressed by all, to pity his temple, profaned by impious men, to have mercy upon the city, which was being ruined, and might soon be leveled to the ground, to hearken to the blood of the murdered, crying out to him, to be mindful of the wicked massacre of innocent babes, and also to avenge the blasphemies perpetuated against his name.
Did that say babes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not the babes.
The Hermenia version says to remember also the lawless destruction of the guiltless infants and the blasphemies against his names, and to hate evil. About this little thing here, the prayer of Judas and his companions echoes the prayer of the seventh brother in the chapter we just read. The prayer divides into 3 sections as God is called upon to see, to hear, and to remember. The same triptych is found in Exodus 2:24 through 25. Quote, "And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and God saw the children of Israel, and he knew them." First, God is asked to look upon his people in 7:6, which, did you get to 7:6?
7:6 is the last chapter. You read it.
Oh, shoot. I'm all mixed up. In 7:6, the brothers and their mother had consoled each other by noting that God looks down. And in 15:2, God is described as the one who observes everything. Here he is called to look upon the people. It says for verse 3 here, verse 3, which in the Hermenia translation says to give ear to the blood clamoring out to him. The Hermenia translation commentary here says Abel's blood cries out to the Lord from the ground and becomes a prototype for those innocently slain. In 1 Enoch 9:10, the souls of those who have died cry out and entreat, and their groan has gone up to the gates of heaven. One might think of the notion of the Aaronis in Greek tradition, where they represent the angry dead come back to punish the guilty. In Virgil's Aeneid, the story is told of how the dead Polydorus speaks and condemns his slayers after Aeneas tries to pull up branches from the soil and drops of blood appear.
Anyway, let's continue. So we are at now verse 5, if you're following along at home. Having gathered around him a band of partisans, Maccabees immediately became invincible over the Gentiles, because the wrath of the Lord had turned to mercy. Towns and villages Judas would take by surprise and burn. He would seize strategic points and rout considerable enemy forces. He used especially the nights as cover for such raids. Reports of his bravery spread far and wide. And didn't you have a note on verse 5?
Verse 5?
Yeah, I think you were saying earlier.
Oh, yeah. It's a linguistic note.
Okay.
But this burning and pillaging, apparently, it's standard kind of stuff here. It says here, well, tell me when you get to the end of verse 11.
Okay, so if you want to go to page 10 of the Hermenia commentary now, this might have something on it. Because now we're talking about Philip. And I think there are multiple Philips.
How many Philips are there? In 1 Maccabees, there is one. Antiochus IV, on his deathbed, appointed this Philip as ruler over all his kingdom and as guardian of his son. On his return to Antioch, this Philip took control of the city. When Lysias heard of the development, he withdrew from the assault on Jerusalem, returned to Antioch, and regained the city. In contrast, in 2 Maccabees, Philip was simply one of Antiochus IV's courtiers. He took the king's body back to Antioch and then fled to Egypt because he feared Antiochus V. Later in 2 Maccabees, Lysias and Antiochus V break off their campaign when they hear that the Philip, who had been left in charge of the government, has lost his senses. The narrative here suggests that this Philip has been left in charge of the government by Antiochus V and Lysias. Are there two Philips? Schwartz noted that there are problems in the account of First Maccabees. It dates the second campaign of Lysias to 150 Seleucid era, either autumn 163/162 BCE or 162/161 BCE. Bezalel Bar Kokhba argued that this campaign took place in 162 BCE. However, since Antiochus IV's funeral procession was in Babylonia in January 163 BCE, Philip would likely have arrived in Antioch in February of that year. The campaign of Antiochus V and Lysias would have been mounted after the return of Philip seems unlikely. Schwartz, holding that the return of Philip caused the end of the siege of Jerusalem, redated the campaign of Lysias and Antiochus V to the late 164 or early 163 BCE, and eventually was led to suggest that there was only one campaign of Lysias and Antiochus V. The simplest suggestion would seem to be that First Maccabees is indeed wrong, but not about the date. Rather, the author of First Maccabees was misled as to who forced Antiochus IV and Lysias to cut off their campaign. The author of the condensed narrative seems to enjoy having people of the same name in important positions. Note the Nicanor of 2nd Maccabees 8 and the Nicanor of 2nd Maccabees 13 through 15. First and Second Maccabees seem to mention two Bacchides as well, one who was present in Judea early on and one who was governor of the province beyond the river during the reign of Demetrius I.
Yeah, so there are quite a few people who, we just have two of the names, so and sometimes it can get confusing to figure out if they are in fact meant to be the same person.
Mm-hmm. And
I think Philip's just trying to make himself look good here, putting himself in all these important positions.
It's got to be Philip, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the author.
Yeah.
But yeah, tell me when you get to the end of verse 11.
Okay. Philip observed how the man gradually made progress and then began to gain more and more through his victories. Accordingly, Philip wrote to Ptolemy, the governor of Coelesyria and Phoenicia, to act in defense of the king's interests. Ptolemy promptly appointed Nicanor, son of Patroclus, a member of the Order of the King's Friends, first class, and sent him in command of no less than 20,000 Gentiles of various stocks, with orders to destroy the entire people of Judea. A co-commander with Nicanor, Ptolemy appointed Gorgias, a man who held the rank of general and had experience in combat. Nicanor resolved he would make up for the king from the proceeds of selling the Jewish prisoners of war. The total of the tribute owed to the Romans, which amounted to 2,000 talents. So he's going to pay him back in people. Immediately, he sent invitations to the coastal towns to come to an auction of Jewish slaves, promising to deliver 90 slaves for a talent. Little did he know that the Almighty's judgment would overtake him. And that's the end of verse 11.
All right, so let's get into this slavery stuff.
Seems like he's selling them kind of cheap.
Mm-hmm. The author notes the ethnic mix of the army. His estimate of the size, 20,000, is half that of 1 Maccabees 338, but is still high. The payment of the tribute to Rome is the same as stated in 1 Maccabees 335, 52, 58. By 165 BCE, the time of Antiochus' march on Persia, the Seleucid indemnity of Rome had already been paid, but Antiochus was well known for desiring money to pay for his extravagant generosity. In order to raise money, Nicanor intends to sell the captured Jews into slavery. 90 slaves per talent was a low price, perhaps expressing contempt for the Jews. At that rate, Nicanor would need to sell 180,000 slaves to pay the tribute.
That's a lot.
many more than those already taken from Jerusalem. In 1 Maccabees 3:41, the traitors come of their own free will, whereas here Nicanor is the instigator of the plan for slavery. Nicanor is thus seen in 2 Maccabees as the source of all evil designs against the Jews. Such a portrayal prepares the way for the denouement. It's not denouncement. It's D-E with like a slash over it. Nouement. Denouement.
Weird. Okay.
Of
Wonderful
the story.
word.
As Nicanor has to flee like a runaway slave. This reversal of affairs fits in the author's desire to make the punishment fit the crime. Even though slavery in the Bible is not necessarily a crime.
No, it's really not. You just, because the thing is they were meant for Jews.
Right.
So if a Jew, you can have slaves, just not Jewish ones.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you
And then
can
there-
have Jewish ones, but you gotta
can't-
let them go.
Yeah, you can't have them forever.
No, they're all indentured servants instead of like full-on slaves.
Unless you can trick them.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
not really trick them, but
You
you
trick
give them a
'em.
wife and kids. It's not
Hey,
really
but I
a
lost
trick.
a tooth. Can I stop being a slave now, according to the Bible? Anyways.
There's also a bit here in Eerdmans. Now, unfortunately, the way that this is written, it breaks things down so that there are some references to things we haven't read yet, but I think now is the right time for it. 2 Maccabees 8 through 36, and 1 Maccabees 3:38 through 4:24 have some things in common. Ptolemy, Nicanor, and Gorgias, the slave traders, and the departure from the Jewish side of the faint-hearted. But 2 Maccabees appears to know nothing of the topographical details of the campaign. Philip, the governor of Jerusalem, writes to Ptolemy, the governor of Coele, Syria, and Phoenicia, probably the son of Dorymenes. Ptolemy, not Lysias, as in 1 Maccabees 3:38, takes responsibility for the Seleucid response and sends Nicanor, son of Patroclus and Gorgias, to wipe out the whole race of Judea, in reality to control Judas and his supporters. In 1 Maccabees, the active general is Gorgias, 1 Maccabees 3:38, 4:1. And in 2 Maccabees, the thrice accursed Nicanor appears as Judas's opponent throughout the rebellion. Gorgias here being merely an associate of Nicanor with no observable role.
Well, it said that Georges was a general.
I don't know. Maybe they have a different translation for
Maybe.
the word here. In 1 Maccabees 3:41, the slave traders come spontaneously. In 2 Maccabees, they are invited by Nicanor in hope of profit. If Nicanor really hoped to raise 2,000 talents at the price of 90 slaves for a talent, he had to sell 180,000 slaves, which is improbable. At the more normal price of 15 slaves a talent, he still would have had to sell 30,000 slaves. The tribute due to the Romans by the Treaty of Apamea.
Okay. So apparently the word that's used there is strategos. There was a whole thing on its multiple possible meanings. So, okay.
Strategist, maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
But it says here that there's this. The tribute due to the Romans by the Treaty of Apamea in 188 BC, however, had long been paid. In 1 Maccabees 3:56, Judas sends the faint-hearted home. In 2 Maccabees 8:13, the cowards desert. Judas's speech in 16 through 18 includes some obvious rhetoric. Verse 17 has an allusion to Psalm 20, verse 7. Verse 18 has an allusion to Psalm 20, verse 7, and a reference to 2 Kings 19:35. See 1 Maccabees 7:41, where Judas uses this reference in praying for help against Nicanor. I remember that. The battle, otherwise unknown within the Macedonians against the Gauls who arrived in settled in what became Galatia in 278 BC, may have involved Jewish mercenaries like those settled by Antiochus III in Lydia. See Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, 148 through 53. Judas's point is that with divine help, a small number may defeat a large number and take much booty. Now, I'm not going to have anything more to say about this from Eerdmans until the end of verse 23. So put that aside.
Okay. Let's continue here.
Yes.
The news of Nicanor's march reached Judas. When he informed his men of the arrival of the army, the cowards and those who lacked faith in the judgment of God ran away and removed themselves. The rest sold what remained of their possessions, and together they prayed to the Lord, "Rescue us, for the impious Nicanor, before meeting us in battle, has sold us as slaves. If not for our own sakes, act for the sake of your covenants with your forefathers, and for the sake with our forefathers, and for the sake of your awesome and glorious name by which we are called." So it's I definitely, this has come up a lot. Mm-hmm. Comes up in Psalms quite a lot too.
Yeah.
The whole like for the sake of you, do it for you, not for us.
Yeah.
We don't deserve it.
Definitely. What
do
verse
it for you?
What verse was that?
That was 15.
15.
Yeah.
I'm just checking the wording.
Yeah, and while you find that stuff, I'll continue.
On their own account.
On their own account, okay. Assembling his men, who numbered 6,000, Maccabees exhorted them, "Do not be terrified by the enemy, and do not fear the vast hordes of Gentiles, which are wickedly coming against us, but fight bravely." It's like, don't fear this incredibly scary thing. Look at it. It's over there. It's about to kill us.
I'm just imagining
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings level encounter, hundreds of angry orcs running at you, and they're like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, well, tell me when you, I'll read this part here. That the author is presenting Judas as giving a pre-battle speech.
Sure.
This type of speech is found rarely in the Hebrew Scriptures. 2 Samuel 10, 11 through 12, 1 Chronicles 19, 12 through 13, 2 Chronicles 32, 7 through 8. The pre-battle description in 1 Maccabees 3:44 through 60.
We've had multiple ones in Maccabees already, though.
Yeah. Differs from that in 2 Maccabees. In the former, the assembly, when gathered for battle, prays and asks for mercy, then sings a hymn before going to Mizpah. There they fast, open the book of the law, pray, and then Judas appoints leaders in the same way as Moses had in Exodus 18:25. Only after all this ritual activity does Judas give a short speech, which echoes the language of the Hebrew Scriptures, and as in 2 Samuel 10, 11 through 12, and 2 Chronicles 32, 7 through 8, emphasizes the role that God plays. In the Greek tradition, W. Kendrick Pritchett has isolated 11 motifs in the pre-battle speeches found in Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, and Polybius.
Xenophon is good.
Yeah, no, that'll be my pseudonym. Among the more important are 1. An emphasis on the previous battle experience of the soldiers. 2. A discussion of the tactics in play. 3. The goals: to win liberty, to defend the country, to repel aggressors, to take vengeance on those wishing to enslave them. 4. A comparison of forces. 5. A call for help from the gods and statements that the auspices are favorable. It is important to note that the Greeks sacrificed before battle. The author of 2 Maccabees appears to combine Jewish and Greek pre-battle traditions. Judas calls on his soldiers not to fear, but to remember the outrages done against them, then to realize that they have God on their side. Finally, he recalls past occasions on which God helped the Jews. In contrast to the speeches in the Greek historians, the emphasis falls more on God's help than on the battle training of the soldiers.
Keep in mind the sight of the outrage they perpetrated upon the holy place in defiance of law, and the wanton tortures they inflicted upon this city, and also their abolition of our ancestral constitution. They, he said, put their trust in arms and in audacity. The audacity. We, however, put our trust in God Almighty, who can by a single nod overthrow not only those who are coming against us, but even the entire universe. So he's very powerful. He went on to tell them how God had come to our rescue in the times of our forefathers, how he had done so in the time of Sennacherib, when 185,000 perished, and how he had done so at the battle fought against the Galatians in Babylonia. All the Jews, numbering 8,000, had marched to meet the emergency in company with 4,000 Macedonians. And when the Macedonians, that's a good one. Yeah. When the Macedonians,
there's a t-shirt idea.
Yep, Macedonians.
It'll be like Alexander the Great, but with like a calculator in his hand.
And when the Macedonians melted away 6,000 Jews, destroyed 120,000 through receiving the help of heaven, and took exceedingly vast quantities of spoils. Through these stories, he raised their spirits and made them ready to die in defense of their laws and their country. That's not great, man. That's not great.
Mm-hmm. Tell me when you get to the end of verse 23.
Okay. He then split his army into 4 units. He appointed his brothers Simon, Joseph, and Jonathan as commanders of each regiment, assigning 1,500 to each. He also ordered his brother Ezra to read aloud the sacred book. After giving as the password God's help, he took command of the 1st Division himself and joined battle with Nicanor. So I'm sure there's some good commentary on the password.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I'm guessing it's because the army didn't recognize him, but they knew that he would say this thing. Yeah. And I think there's some name, like God's help is also used as a name. Maybe it's listed in some of these commentaries.
Don't attack us because we said that.
All right.
Guess. That's my guess.
Let me check this. Well, you check that name in his commentary over there.
Sure, yeah, I can do that.
So 8:22 through 23 raise difficulties. Joseph is not known elsewhere as a brother of Judas, and the Greek text leaves the role of Eleazar in the Latin text Ezra less certain than the NRSV translation suggests. The identity of Judas's brothers may have varied in different traditions. See the varying lists of the disciples of Jesus.
So apparently God's help password, the only note here on that is that pagans and Christians use similar passwords.
Well, furthermore, so many of these things.
Yeah, I know.
As any good speech maker, Judas proffers, Proffers, examples of God's help. The first is the defeat of Sennacherib in 701 BCE, 2 Kings 19:35 through 36, Isaiah 37:36. See also 1 Maccabees 7:41, 2 Maccabees 15:22. The second example is taken from more recent history, but the precise reference is unknown. The Galatians were the Celts who, due to unrest in Western and Central Europe, were forced to migrate to the east and southeast. In 280/79, some Celts marched through Macedonia and Thrace and invaded Greece, while others, complete tribal groups, went to Asia Minor in 278/77 and overran many Greek cities. After a long struggle, they were confined to an area north of Phrygia, later called Galatia. Scholars have suggested that the incident in 2nd Maccabees may refer to the Battle of Antiochus I against the Celts in the 270s, although this took place in Asia Minor, which would cause the text of 2nd Maccabees to be amended from Babylonia to Bagadonia, near the Taurus Mountains in Cilicia, to an incident in the suppression of the rebellion of Molon, governor general of the eastern satrapies, by Antiochus III in 220 BCE, or to the rebellion in 227 and 26 of Antiochus Hierax, who used Galatian mercenaries in the east against his brother Seleucus III. The latter seems the most likely scenario. The Galatian invasion made a lasting impression on the cities of Asia Minor. Also, the division of troops described here in verse 22 is different than that of 1 Maccabees 3:55. The text is very difficult to translate in 22 through 23. Major manuscripts read as if Judas appointed his 4 brothers, Simon, Joseph, Jonathan, and Eleazar, to lead the 4 1,500-man units, and that Judas read to them from the scriptures. In this case, it is unclear whether the first division, Spira, refers to the phalanx of 256 men. Spira refers to a phalanx of 256 men. It's unclear whether this first division was part of one of these 4 1,500-man units. Other manuscripts suggest, and are followed by the NRSV, that Eleazar read aloud from the scriptures. The Latin manuscripts read Ezra instead of Eleazar. The names of Judas's brothers in 1 Maccabees 2:3-5 are John, Simon, Eleazar, and Jonathan. But this account lists Joseph instead of John. Some scholars have suggested that this is a reference to the envious couple, Joseph and Azariah, of 1 Maccabees 5:18, 55-62. But there Joseph is called son of Zechariah.
So it wouldn't really fit in.
Mm-hmm. Whatever the intended meaning of verses 22 through 23, the author insists that Judas calls on God for aid and that Judas's whole family is involved in the enterprise. And now, I think that's a good amount of commentary on this section,
I think so, yeah.
and I really won't have much until you get to the end of 33.
Sounds good. With the Almighty as their ally, they slaughtered over 9,000. Over 9,000.
Oh my gosh.
Over 9,000!
I can't believe that this exists way pre the meme.
They slaughtered over 9,000 of the enemy and left the greater part of Nicanor's army wounded and crippled, putting them all to flight. They captured the money of those who had come to purchase them as slaves. After pursuing the enemy for a considerable distance, they left off when the hour compelled them, for it was the eve of the Sabbath. Accordingly, they did not prolong the pursuit. Rather, they collected the arms of the enemy and stripped off the spoils, and then turned to observe the Sabbath. They went to great lengths in blessing and thanking the Lord, who had preserved them alive until this day, when drops of mercy had begun to fall upon them. After the Sabbath, they allotted...
What verse was that?
I just finished 27.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about the division of the treasure that they get here.
Okay.
It says here, the division of the booty is quite remarkable. In the Hebrew scriptures, there has been a dispute between David and some of his followers as to who should share in the spoil. And David had decreed that, quote, the share of the one who goes down into battle shall be the same as the share of the one who stays by the baggage. They shall all share alike. From that day forward, he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel. It continues to the present day. 1 Samuel 30, 24 through 25. In Numbers 31, 25 through 30, Moses was commanded by the Lord to divide the spoil into 2 parts between the warriors who went out to battle and all the congregation. The temple scroll from Qumran adjusts these 2 statements and admits also portions for the king and the priests and Levites. 11 QT, 11 Q, 19, 58, 11 through 15.
Hold on. What was the first one? 11Q what?
11 QT.
Okay.
And it says 11 Q, 19, 58, 11 through 15. The author of 2nd Maccabees, in the present arrangement of the text, makes the soldiers receive what is left over after the booty has been allotted to the tortured, the widows, and the orphans. There is no mention of the priests and Levites, nor of the whole congregation. Rather, the preeminence is given to those who had suffered in the persecution. Apart from 8:28 and 30, the verb to torture and its cognates are found only in the story of the 7 brothers and their mother, and in a general description of what had befallen Jerusalem. The 7th brother had expressed the hope that the anger of God would come to an end through the deaths of his brothers. Exodus 22, 22 through 24 had warned against abusing widows and orphans, and it became a staple command not to oppress them. The inclusion of the widows and orphans both shows the piety of Judas's forces and has them stand as an image of the oppressed Jewish community. Did you find the Qumran thing?
Not the specific one.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. Anyways. But
yeah, tell me when you get to the end of 33.
Okay. After the Sabbath, they allotted to the victims of torture and to the widows and to the orphans a share of the spoils, and divided the rest among themselves. With that done, the entire community turned in supplication to the merciful Lord, praying that he would be completely reconciled with his servants. There's actually a note in here before the next verse. Verses 30 through 32 are a parenthetical note clarifying Judas's policy after victories.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll get into it once you finish 33.
Sure. Moreover, when they met the forces of Timotheus, and I think page 10 of the Hermenia commentary might have stuff on him too, and Bacchides in battle, when we talked about Bacchides a little.
Yeah. How many Timothys are there in 1 Maccabees 5? A Timothy takes part in a battle near Jazer, 5:6, and reemerges in Upper Gilead at Dathema on the eastern side of the Jordan to fight again. These events take place after the cleansing of the temple. In 2 Maccabees, a Timothy fights against Judas around the time of the attack of Nicanor, and then fights against Judas with cavalry near Gazra. This Timothy is at the head of a tremendous force and is killed when he retreats to Gazra. Then later in 2 Maccabees, a Timothy is mentioned leading forces in Gilead. Should one attempt to reconcile the accounts in 1st and 2nd Maccabees and state either that the author of 2nd Maccabees is hopelessly confused or that there were 2 Timothys? That the author of 2nd Maccabees is hopelessly confused, or that the author has deliberately changed Jazer to Gazara? Or were there 2 Timothys? The author of the narrative in 2nd Maccabees certainly portrays them as 2 different commanders.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more on that too.
Commander Timothy. No. Commander Timothy. There's
So
too
anyways,
many of you guys.
He met them in battle, Bacchides and Timotheus. They slew over 2,000 of them, captured towering fortresses, and gave the victims of torture, the orphans and the widows and even the elderly, a share of the huge spoils equal to their own. On that occasion, they carefully collected the arms of the enemy and deposited them all at strategic points and brought the rest of the spoils to Jerusalem. Of the 2 Timothy, they slew the Phylarch, a most impious man who had done the Jews much harm. That's the end of 32. But Phylarch and the two Timothy, I'm guessing that's the house. Is this supposed to be the house of Timothy? I'm just guessing there.
Well,
I'm not sure. That's verse 32.
32. Grimm held that some Greek thing must be a proper name, Phylarches, as otherwise one should not have had the article but the indefinite pronoun. However, a proper name does not usually use the article unless it has been previously mentioned. See, for example, the way that Lysimachos and Sostratos are introduced in 429. Rather, the article is used here in 524.
And apparently the grammatical pattern is weird, and the the construction is annoyingly ambiguous. Literally, it could be translated here, those around Timotheus, but it could also mean only Timotheus himself. And Polybius is an example suggesting that here it could mean the two Timothy. There's a lot of it's a weird reading, basically.
Now, I've got quite a bit to get into here. So what's up?
So tribes, that word there, so phyli means tribes. So a phylarch would be like leader of the tribes. Yeah.
Okay. So 8:30 through 32 belong to another context, perhaps summarizing 2 Maccabees 12:10 through 31. See Bar Kokhba. I'll get into Bar Kokhba. 8:33 is another independent fragment. The burning of the gates is mentioned at 2 Maccabees 1:8 and 1 Maccabees 4:38, but it is not clear that all three passages refer to the same incident. The reference to the Calistines in verse 33 involves some muddled syntax and may be an intrusion. Did you read verse 33?
No, not yet.
Read verse 33.
In the course of the victory celebration on their own soil, they burned to death Calisthians and Callisthenes and his followers, who had set fire to the sacred gateway. The men had taken refuge in a single hut, and thus they got the just recompense for their wickedness. That's the end of 33.
Okay. So the introductory and acts to show that these verses are a continuation of the previous section, as in 15:6. Only here and in 8:27 through 28 in 2 Maccabees is the taking of spoils noted. In addition to those named as receiving spoils in 8:28, the elderly are also mentioned. Here, the context demands that elder is not a member of the Council of Elders, as in 13:13 and 14:37, but an elderly person. By the description similar to the division of the spoils in 8:28 and by the repetition of the same aorist principle collecting the weapons, from 8:27, the author strongly connects these verses to the end of the preceding section. However, there has been no previous mention of Timothy and Bacchides, and the taking control of fortified heights suggests some siege action. The taking of the booty to Jerusalem, while perhaps in compliance with the command of Numbers 31:28 through 29 to separate out from the booty tribute to the Lord and to make an offering to the Lord, does seem to presume that Judas's forces had some control over Jerusalem, a control not described fully until 10:1. Bar Kokhba has cogently argued that the snippet of information in these verses is actually a doublet of the campaign mentioned in 2 Maccabees 12, where Judas goes on the hunt for a local governor, Timothy. During this campaign, he defeats a force of Arabs and captures various fortified towns. Timothy is said to escape, and the Jews eventually return to Jerusalem to celebrate Pentecost. Bar Kokhba proposes, quote, "It thus appears that the passage in 2 Maccabees 8:30 through 33 is a summing up of Judas Maccabeus' accomplishments in the Gilead campaign, which are described in detail in chapter 12. Presumably, Jason of Cyrene combined these passages in order to stress that the lofty qualities of the Jewish soldiers and their strictness in observing the precepts which led to the drastic change in events beginning with the Battle of Emmaus were discernible in other battles as well. For that purpose, he here summarized the episode of the war in Gilead, described at greater length and in greater detail later in the book, emphasizing the qualities noted. Furthermore, in this NIB commentary, it says, First Maccabees, Bacchides is much more important figure than the quick mention at Second Maccabees 8:30 would suggest. He was governor of the province beyond the river, i.e. between the Euphrates and Egypt. He is sent by Demetrius I to subdue Judea, which he does. After the later defeat of Nicanor, he returns again and defeats Judas, who dies in battle. Then Bacchides pursues Judas's brother Jonathan, but finally comes to terms with him. His activity is completely absent from the corresponding narrative in Second Maccabees. It is unlikely that such a high-ranking personage, it has a dash. I thought it said person age. I don't know. A high-ranking personage would be listed after the middle-level commander Timothy. And so one wonders whether another Bacchides is meant here. The death of Timothy is recorded at 2 Maccabees 9:3 and 10:24 through 28, but 2 Maccabees 12:10 through 25 records Timothy's escape, so there seems to be two Timothys involved in 2 Maccabees. However, in 1 Maccabees, there's only one Timothy who fights Judas on 3 occasions.
Yeah, so it can get a little annoying there, kind of confusing.
Yeah, it also says 2 Maccabees records that Timothy dies in battle, whereas 1 Maccabees doesn't.
Yeah. So there's quite a bit of stuff like that. Quite a lot of differences.
Oh, yeah, and on the Phylarchos.
So Timothy is, nearly immortal. That's my guess. He comes back and screams, "Still alive!" at the end of every battle. He's that kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. But about this Phylarchos thing, the word for commander, Phylarchos, is sometimes taken as a proper name, Phylarchos. The Greek word does not refer to the city Jerusalem, but to the fatherland, Patris. Nothing else is known about the Callisthenes.
Okay. The heinous sinner Nicanor, who had brought 1,000 dealers to sell them Jewish slaves, through God's help was humiliated by those whom he had regarded as beneath contempt. Putting off his splendid garments and dismissing his attendants, he fled cross-country like a runaway slave.
Wait, what did they call Nicanor? What you just read? What did they call him? In verse 34.
The heinous sinner.
The triply offensive.
That's very different.
Yes, very different. The adjective triply offensive is also used in 15:3 of the second Nicanor, which helps bind the narrative together. Mm-hmm. The author returns to the motif of the punishment fitting the crime, selling the Jews as slaves.
Right, yeah. So now he is acting like a slave.
Mm-hmm.
He fled across country like a runaway slave and was especially lucky to reach Antioch, considering that his army had been destroyed. The man who had undertaken to raise the full amount of the tribute from the proceeds of selling the captivity of the people of Jerusalem now proclaimed that the Jews possessed a champion and were invulnerable because they followed the laws which were his commandments. Some good old divine intervention. You do the things for God, and he does the stuff for you. But it's really for him, right? Because that was what he was asked. That's what they were asking God for. It's like for your sake, not for ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the end of our readings for the day, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the end of our readings. And, if you want to make the show longer, you can go onto our wish list and you can get some books. Maybe you can you can help us create documentary style videos, or if you want more stuff on this show, more books on this table, there's stuff for that too. We also have a Patreon. Lots of cool stuff on Patreon. For $1 a month, you can get access to all of our video scripts.
Yes, and if you donate more, you can get entered into a random T-shirt giveaway.
Yes, random T-shirt
on the first Sunday of each month.
Yes.
I mean, if we were doing it on the first day of each month, we'd have to do it right now, wouldn't we?
Right. Yeah, but we're doing it on the first Sunday. Yep.
Yeah, first Sunday of each month. If you donate to us $50 a month or more,
You could be on this show or our Sunday show, whatever.
yep, once a month.
Yeah, you get lots of nifty rewards. So
Don't forget that $10 also gets you access to the once a month Patreon hangout.
Oh yeah,
that was was that the $10 one or is
That's
that the
the $10
$20
one.
one? It's one of those.
You think?
Nah,
It's a number that's higher
it's
than
in
one.
there somewhere.
Yeah, it's in there somewhere.
And also, there's the writing,
Yeah, that's true.
unicorn book.
Yeah, it's not just that, but if it's $5 or more, then you get all the books that we publish. So you get my self-publish, yeah, because legal stuff. So you get the horrible book I wrote years ago. But then if Ruben writes something, or if I write another thing, which I probably will, you get that. That's included.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know what else. Oh yeah, I ordered a bunch of Islamic studies stuff. I've been floating the name with Lawrence, the public Islamic studies seminars.
Yes. I think that's a good one.
Yeah. It was the
Public
dirtiest I could get
Islamic
it.
Studies Seminar.
Oh, it's so hard to get after, our atheist Sunday school and Friday. I just don't get it.
You don't get it? Okay.
No,
okay.
it's too difficult.
Okay. Well, I don't think I
It's
should
way
explain
above
it.
my
Yeah.
head. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I ordered a bunch of Qurans and stuff.
Fantastic.
Probably about 15 books, maybe. But
That's fantastic.
yeah,
We
I don't know if it's news.
got
but
my Trump bucks.
I've purchased a 3D printer, and perhaps one of the first things other than miniatures I'll be printing are some maybe bottle openers or keychains.
Keychain bottle openers.
Yeah, or both. And I can get right on that as soon as it comes. It's
Yeah, we can make
rather
like
sophisticated.
little GI Joes, back and front body plate, and then you put the head in and clip it together, and yeah, we can make like a little Lawrence figure.
Yeah. That'd be neat. $100.
$100.
No.
I mean, it depends on how expensive it is for me to make, but so far, once you have the 3D printer,
Yeah.
the filaments are pretty cheap. You could even do water-soluble stuff. It's a dual printer, so I can make parts that move, that have interlocking gauges that you don't have to disassemble to reassemble, meaning fully functioning action figures, guys.
Well, with that being said, I mean,
what else? We got Teespring too.
Yeah, we got Teespring, whacking fun T-shirts.
Yes.
We've got Facebook, Twitter.
Facebook, Twitter. It's free to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So yeah, Twitter is at MKE Atheists.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's also Milwaukee Atheists at gmail.com. That's our Gmail. If you want to
email us something, I guess.
Yeah, well, we could get fan mail.
Sure.
Right?
Why not?
Right. So
Especially in hard times of quarantine. Yeah.
Or like really strongly worded letters.
Yeah, that's fine too. Whatever.
If you just want to insult us, that's cool.
That's
too.
great. That's great. I'll just relish that.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
I think that's all the shilling we got to do.
Sunday, we're finishing all the Psalms.
Yes, Sunday, all the Psalms are finished. I'm currently working on a video on the canonization of First Enoch in the Ethiopian canon.
Oh, excellent. I'll help you out with that, I guess.
If you can.
Let's talk about the Octatuk.
Okay, then. So, yeah, that's all the shilling we have to do. Yeah. All the links are in the description. It's right down there, guys. Right down there. Remember when people used to have to point at the side?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't point at me.
If you see it right under the table, you scroll
directly down there. Yeah.
You scroll
Just
down.
Scroll
the
and we're
there's
there.
like the YouTube, the little box there, and it's all physically written out on the white sheet. every time.
Damn
No,
straight.
No, that's not how we do it. We don't have that much money.
So yeah, check out all that stuff. Thank you for joining the show today. I think we had a nice little talk about Maccabees and stuff being ex nihilo or not.
Yeah.
We had a nice little discussion there.
Even though there wasn't an ex nihilo argument in
it
the
wasn't.
text.
It just kind of looked like there was.
Yeah, it was misinterpreted by some scholars as an ex nihilo argument.
Yeah.
Right? Which, let's baselessly jump to metaphysical conclusions.
As you do in the first century. Either way,
That's a funny little metaphor, right? Because she's like, I don't know how you grew in the womb. Shit. It must be created from nothing, right?
that would be strange.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah, that would have been really weird.
Yes.
It's in
Luckily-
lines with the style of spontaneous creation at the time, where they thought flies came from rotten food out of nowhere and stuff. Yeah, they had that idea, and of course,
Spontaneous generation.
easily disproven with
Yeah.
modern science. But what have you? Good theory. Great go at it.
Hey, that's BS, man. I can tell you for sure that flies spontaneously appear places. Like, shoot, I'll have a piece of food that I forget about on a table,
Why?
and then magically there will be flies around it.
It is magic.
Yep.
I don't think
we don't have any
there's-
flies here, and
Yep.
with good reason. They didn't get in, and we didn't spawn them.
Yep. But fruit flies, they're also magic. You leave fruit out, they spontaneously appear.
They're gonna fly around them. That's what's gonna happen.
My favorite joke from League of Legends is about that.
What?
Fruit flies like banana. Time flies like an arrow.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Great. Amazing.
Well, with that being said, we will
we'll see you on Sunday.